This is Astrology for Awakening. We're exploring Mars conjunct Neptune. Mars is the warrior, the inner warrior. Neptune is the inner mystic. And they're conjunct, precisely. This is a merger of two very, very different energies. And their integration, their coming together, presents us with a paradox. A paradox definitely to the rational mind, but also a spiritual koan or question for our whole nervous system. How do we integrate? How do we discover what is meant to emerge as these two energies commingle? Mars is intense. Neptune is spacious. Mars focuses precisely on the target. Neptune diffuses attention into a kind of boundaryless cloud of awareness. Mars calls us to agency, the exertion of willpower. Neptune calls for surrender, the opening to thy will be done awareness. Mars is action. Neptune is stillness. Mars is determination. Neptune is relaxation. Mars is passion, and Neptune is compassion. Mars is about pushing through, and Neptune is about letting go. So as you listen to that list, you can feel, I hope, the paradoxical nature of this invitation, of this aspect, because every aspect is a spiritual invitation to potential awakening that calls us to open and to deepen to something that may not be, and rarely is, obvious on the surface. And so the first thing is to notice in that listing, passion, compassion, action, letting go, which of the energies do you tend to historically prefer? To ask yourself, am I more habitually leaning to the Mars impulse that sort of says, don't just sit there, do something? Or am I more inclined and attracted to the Neptunian quality? Don't just do something, sit there. Obviously, we all have Mars and Neptune. In our charts, we all have those archetypal energies in our soul. You have both, of course, but within your personality structure, within your conditioned identity, you likely have a preference. And this aspect can be an opportunity to discover which of those energies we prioritize. Because when we prioritize one as they come together, we tend to deprioritize or push the other one into the shadow. In other words, we push into the shadow. Do we push into the shadow, do the action, the certainty, or do we push into the shadow the drifty, open, expansive qualities of Neptune? Because as they're coming together like this, there's some third thing. There's some alchemical birth of a thought, of a perspective that is neither one nor the other, but the two overlapping and intermingling. And it's like, it's a new thought, it's a new understanding, it's a new stance. And it's asking us to open to that. And this kind of opening of Mars and Neptune brings up the image, the archetypal image and energy, because they both have some of this image of sacrifice. Both Mars and Neptune have a flavor of sacrifice that's infused into them. It's a place where they can meet. But the Mars quality of sacrifice, which is the warrior's capacity to risk everything, to make what they call in the media the ultimate sacrifice, which is of life, one's own life, for the sake of the cause. But the dark side of Mars is, I'm making the ultimate sacrifice of you, the enemy, in service of the cause. Neptune is also about sacrifice, the mystical energy of sacrifice that sees all of life as a dream and gratefully will sacrifice the dream of the personal identity into a vaster ocean of consciousness. But that also has a shadow side. When we suppress the validity of our individuality and dissolve the challenge of standing up for our own values in self-intoxication, in drug-induced oceans of Neptunian dissolving. Both are about sacrifice, but they're really, as they come together, the challenge is to not fall into the shadow sacrifice, to not become a self-righteous warrior. We're seeing this writ large in the headlines, how the dark side of the holy warrior, the dark side of sacrifice, which is the willingness, like in a holy crusade, to sanction the killing of other people as a means of purifying the land, to validate and even laud the expansion of our own territory, the empire building possibilities of righteously taking over the world. That's the shadow side of this energy. And it's being shown, we're getting a master class, we're being taught about the shadow side of the holy warrior as Mars and Neptune come together. We're seeing it in the violence, the mass murdering, the war, the practice of blood sacrifice as a way of purifying the world is an ancient symbol, a myth that has roots deep in the human psyche. And we are being invited collectively to lift that symbol out of the unconscious so that we're not creating harm, havoc, and suffering, but rather so that we perform an act of true sacrifice, sacred sacrifice, which is sacrifice that is life-giving. It means relaxing our rigid, self-righteous boundaries so that new life energies can flow in. It means relaxing our grip on our certainty so that new insights can flow in. It means recognizing our own tendencies towards self-righteousness and the projection of confusion, darkness, and evil onto our, quote, enemies, whether they're sitting across the table from us in our families, or whether they're across town in our communities or around on the other side of the world. To not drink the Kool-Aid of our own self-righteousness, to not be intoxicated by a sense of powerlessness and victimization that then gets compensated for through violent actions. This is part of what this aspect is asking us to do. It's to recognize our own shadow tendencies to be self-righteous and to otherize those with whom we have different political, religious, philosophical opinions. We can see the violence in others. We're being invited, and it's tough to see that in ourselves, to take responsibility for those impulses so that we can engage in the true activity of the sacred warrior, which is to sacrifice the small self-identity, the conditioned self, and to open up to a call of service that takes us beyond our habits of self-protection. True sacrifice is life-giving. It's the acorn shell that is sacrificed in order for the acorn to grow into the oak tree. In the very self-same way, we are not designed, it's not our true soul's purpose to stay in the boundary of our small self's kingdom, not to patrol the boundaries of our small self with our fixed ideals and our fixed ideas. This aspect is calling us to discover for each of us what is the life-giving nature of sacrifice, to trade in our weapons of self-righteousness, our swords of certainty, for what's called in Tibetan Buddhism the Vajra sword, and around the world the sword of discernment, the spiritual sword of discernment that cuts through the knot of our conditioned identity in order to open us courageously to a life of service to the whole, a life of celebration of the mystery, and to recognize the sacred nature of all that arises so that we might truly be a spiritual warrior that clears the path for all to be free and to be whole.